Theed's royal palace echoed with the hum of clashing lightsabers. In the depths of the reactor core, a battle of fate unfolded. Red clashed against green and blue as Darth Maul, a demon of the dark side, fought against Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Sith warrior moved with unrelenting precision, his double-bladed saber a whirlwind of death. The battle had been long and grueling, and Qui-Gon, though powerful, was beginning to tire. His movements slowed just for a second. Maul saw his opening. A red blade spun downward, striking true. Qui-Gon gasped as the plasma cut through his chest. The Jedi Master collapsed, his lightsaber clattering from his grip. Obi-Wan screamed, and then time itself shattered. A wave of energy pulsed through the chamber. The Force twisted, bending reality like a mirage. The air crackled, as if the galaxy itself recognized that something unnatural was occurring. And then he appeared. A figure stepped out of the rift, draped in a long, dark cloak. A battle-worn mask concealed his face, save for piercing eyes that radiated an unfathomable presence in the Force. His aura was unlike anything in the Jedi or Sith. He was both the storm and the calm, the past and the future. He was Revan. Maul sensed the disturbance too late. Before the Sith could react, Revan extended his hand, and the dark side itself buckled. An invisible force lifted Maul from the ground and hurled him backward, slamming him into the durasteel wall with a sickening crack. Obi-Wan stumbled back in shock, his lightsaber still humming in his grip. "Who?" Revan ignored him. Instead, he turned to the fallen Qui-Gon. His gauntleted hand hovered over the dying Jedi Master. The Force trembled, light and dark intertwined. As Revan willed something that had not been seen for millennia, life from the brink of death, Qui-Gon gasped, his eyes flying open. The deep wound in his chest began to mend, flesh knitting itself back together. The Jedi Master sat up, coughing. He placed a hand on his chest, where the fatal wound had been moments ago. This is impossible," he whispered. Revan finally spoke, his voice deep and calm, yet weighted with the knowledge of countless battles. "You were not meant to die here, Qui-Gon Jinn. The Force has plans for you still." Obi-Wan barely had time to process the impossible before Darth Maul let out a feral growl, his fury igniting like an inferno. The Sith launched himself forward, his crimson blades twirling in a blur of motion. But this time, he wasn't facing a Jedi. Revan moved. Faster than even Obi-Wan's trained eyes could follow, the ancient warrior ignited his own weapon, an ominous violet blade that crackled with energy. With a single elegant motion, he caught Maul's attack mid-strike. For the first time, the Egu Sith staggered. Revan pressed forward, his strikes neither wild nor restrained. Each movement was perfect, calculated, brutal, unstoppable. His style was not of the Jedi nor the Sith. It was something more. Maul snarled in frustration. He spun, his saber staff, aiming to outmaneuver this unknown warrior. But Revan anticipated every move. He stepped inside Maul's guard, and with lightning speed, severed the Sith's right arm at the elbow. A scream of pure rage and pain filled the chamber. Maul crumpled to the ground, clutching the stump where his arm had been. His saber staff clattered away, its red blades extinguishing. Revan loomed over the defeated Sith, his own lightsaber still humming. He raised his hand, and for a moment, Obi-Wan felt a surge of the dark side, pure, raw power gathering at Revan's fingertips. Qui-Gon, still catching his breath, spoke. "Do not kill him." His voice was calm but firm. "That is not the Jedi way." Revan glanced at him. "The Jedi way is flawed. That Sith will return, stronger than before. He will seek vengeance. Would you rather spare him now and doom others later?" Obi-Wan clenched his jaw, stepping beside his master. "We take him prisoner. It's what a Jedi would do." For a long moment, Revan said nothing. Then he exhaled and deactivated his saber. As you wish. With a flick of his wrist, Maul's unconscious body lifted into the air. He hovered, helpless, before collapsing back onto the ground, stunned into unconsciousness by the sheer force of Revan's will. The battle was over, but this was only the beginning. Qui-Gon, still weak but alive, stared at their enigmatic savior. "Who are you?" Revan regarded him in silence. Then he removed his mask. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon both inhaled sharply. The man beneath the mask looked human, yet there was something ancient in his eyes. His long, dark hair framed a face that carried the weight of centuries. Scars marked his skin, but they did not diminish his presence. If anything, they enhanced it. "My name is Revan," he said at last, "and your galaxy is on the verge of repeating a mistake it cannot afford." Silence fell over the chamber. For the first time, Qui-Gon Jinn realized that the battle against the Sith was far greater than they had ever imagined. And if this warrior from the past had returned, then perhaps the true war was only beginning. The silence in the reactor chamber was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of Naboo's battle still raging above. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon could only stare at the man before them, this warrior who had appeared from nowhere, wielding both the power of the light and the dark, with an ease neither Jedi had ever seen. Revan. Qui-Gon was the first to break the silence. "You said the galaxy is repeating a mistake. What mistake?" Revan looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "The fall of the Jedi, the rise of the Sith. It has happened before, and it will happen again." His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen history repeat itself more times than he cared to count. Obi-Wan frowned. "The Sith have been extinct for 1,000 years. Darth Maul is the first we've encountered in generations." Revan let out a dry chuckle. "You think this is the first?" "No, Jedi. He is only the beginning. Your enemy is far greater than you know." His violet eyes burned into Obi-Wan's. "And your order is too blind to see it." Before Obi-Wan could retort, Qui-Gon placed a hand on his shoulder. "There will be time for questions later. Right now, we must get to the Queen." He turned to Revan. "Will you come with us?" Revan studied him, as if weighing something in his mind. "For now." With that, the three of them, along with Maul's unconscious body, made their way out of the chamber. The battle for Naboo was over. Queen Amidala had captured Viceroy Gunray. Anakin Skywalker had destroyed the droid control ship, and the planet was free. But in the shadows of victory, unease lingered. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan stood before the Jedi Council in the temple on Coruscant. But this time things were different. Instead of mourning Qui-Gon's death, they stood with a living legend at their side, Revan. Mace Windu's expression was unreadable as he studied the stranger. "You claim your name is Revan," he said. "A name lost to history. You expect us to believe you are the same Revan who fought in the Mandalorian Wars? The same Revan who fell to the dark side and returned?" Revan met his gaze evenly. "Believe what you want. I am here." Yoda's ears twitched. "How?" "A question that is. Impossible. This should be." Revan smirked. "The Force is not limited by your understanding of it." The room fell silent. Qui-Gon finally stepped forward. "Masters, I do not claim to understand how or why Revan is here, but I do know one thing. He saved my life, and he defeated the Sith assassin, Darth Maul. Without him, Obi-Wan and I would not be standing before you today." Ki-Adi-Mundi stroked his beard. "And what of the Sith Lord?" "He is imprisoned on Naboo," Obi-Wan answered. "Alive!" A murmur spread through the council. The Sith had returned, and this man, this anomaly, had been the one to stop him. Mace Windu studied Revan closely. "Your power is different, not just light. I sense the dark side in you." Revan did not flinch. "Of course you do." He turned to the council fully, his voice carrying an edge now. "And that is why you will never defeat the Sith." The air in the chamber shifted. Yoda's eyes narrowed. "Certain of this, are you?" Revan's gaze swept across the council, his expression unreadable. "Your order has spent 1,000 years blinding itself to half of the Force. You fear the dark side so much that you refuse to understand it. That is why the Sith always return. That is why you will lose." "Arrogance!" Windu snapped. "You sound like a Sith yourself." Revan took a step forward, the room vibrating with the sheer power he carried. "I was a Sith. I was a Jedi, and I was more." His voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "And I have seen what happens when the Jedi refuse to change." The council was silent. Even Yoda seemed disturbed by his words. Qui-Gon finally spoke. "Perhaps we should listen to what he has to say." Mace Windu shook his head. "The Jedi do not need the teachings of an old warlord." "Then the Jedi will fall," Revan said simply. The council chamber felt colder at that moment. Revan turned toward the doors, his cloak flowing behind him. "I have no more time to waste here." "Where will you go?" Qui-Gon asked. Revan looked over his shoulder. "To find the true Sith before they strike first." And with that, he left. Deep in the unknown regions, far beyond the Jedi's reach, a presence stirred, a dark, suffocating will that had lurked in the void for centuries. Darth Sidious stood in his hidden chamber, gazing into the darkness beyond Coruscant. He had felt it. Something had changed. The future, once so clear, was now clouded, and there was a name that echoed in the currents of the Force, a name that had no place in this time. Revan. Sidious's lips curled into a scowl. The game had changed, and now he would have to deal with it. Revan strode through the bustling streets of Coruscant, his dark cloak flowing behind him. The city planet pulsed with life, but beneath the neon glow of speeders and high-rise towers, he could feel it rot. The Republic was weaker than it had been in his time. Corruption festered beneath its polished exterior, and worst of all, the Jedi had allowed it to happen. They had spent 1,000 years believing they had won. They were wrong, and so was the Sith Lord hiding among them. Revan stopped at the edge of a balcony, overlooking the vast cityscape. He could feel the Sith, somewhere, watching, planning. Their tendrils were buried deep within the Republic's heart. He knew this game far too well. Sidious was already moving against him. Good. He was done waiting. In the depths of Coruscant, hidden behind layers of deception, Darth Sidious stood. Before his lone apprentice, Count Dooku, the former Jedi bowed his head slightly. "The Jedi are shaken," he said. "Maul's defeat has forced them to acknowledge the return of the Sith." Sidious, cloaked in shadow, did not respond immediately. His mind was elsewhere. Revan, a name that had no place in this era, a being that should not exist. His face twisted into a scowl. "This Revan is a threat unlike any Jedi," Sidious murmured. "He does not follow their code. He does not share their weakness." Dooku studied his master carefully. It was rare for Sidious to speak of another Force user with anything but contempt. "Shall I deal with him?" the Count asked. Sidious turned, his yellow eyes narrowing. "No. You would lose." Dooku's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Sidious began to pace. "Revan has defied both Jedi and Sith before, but he is still mortal. He can be killed." He stopped, his lips curling into a smirk. "And I believe I know just the person to do it." Revan entered a dimly lit cantina in the lower levels of Coruscant. The air was thick with the scent of alcohol and sweat, and the murmur of smugglers and bounty hunters filled the space. He walked forward, ignoring the wary glances. Thrown his way, he was looking for someone, and then he found her. A woman sat alone in a corner booth, her armor battle-worn but well-maintained. A Mandalorian helmet rested on the table beside her drink. Revan smirked. Some things never change. He approached and slid into the seat across from her. She didn't. Look up. You lost? She asked, taking a sip of her drink. Revan leaned forward. I'm exactly where I need to be, Mandalore. Finally, the woman lifted her gaze, her sharp brown eyes locking onto his. That's not my name. It should be. She studied him for a long moment, then snorted. Big words, stranger. Revan removed his mask, revealing his face fully for the first time since arriving in this time. Her expression didn't change, but he could feel the shock rippling through her. You, she whispered. Revan smirked. Surprised? The Mandalorian, Bo-Katan Kryze, leaned back. You should be dead. I get that a lot. She exhaled, studying him with newfound wariness. What do you want? Revan's gaze hardened. War is coming. I need warriors. Bo-Katan narrowed her eyes. Mandalorians don't fight for Jedi. Revan's smirk deepened. Good thing I'm not a Jedi. At the Jedi temple, Qui-Gon Jinn stood alone in the archives, his mind troubled. He had always believed the Jedi needed to change, but now, he wondered if they were already too far gone. The Council refused to acknowledge Revan's warnings. They dismissed his knowledge, his experience. They feared him, just as they had feared Qui-Gon's own defiance. A voice broke his thoughts. You doubt them. He turned to see Mace Windu standing at the entrance, his expression unreadable. Qui-Gon exhaled. I doubt their ability to change before it's too late. Windu stepped forward. Revan is dangerous. Qui-Gon met his gaze. So is ignorance. The two Jedi Masters stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Windu spoke. If you continue down this path, Qui-Gon, you may find yourself standing against the Council. Qui-Gon's response was immediate. Then so be it. Windu studied him for a long moment, then simply nodded and left. Qui-Gon turned back to the archives, a heavy weight settling in his chest. The Jedi Order was crumbling, and he wasn't sure if it could be saved. In the dark halls of an abandoned industrial sector, a figure knelt before Sidious's hologram. His face was obscured by a dark hood, but his presence radiated danger. Sidious's voice was smooth and commanding. The Jedi will never act against him, so I'm forced to turn to you. The figure lifted his head slightly, revealing sharp, predatory features. I assume the bounty is high. Sidious smirked. Kill Revan, and you will be the richest man in the Outer Rim. The assassin nodded. Consider it done. As the hologram faded, the figure stood and turned toward the massive viewport. His hands flexed, the bloodlust in his veins already burning. This would be the greatest hunt of his life, for Cad Bane never failed a job. Revan stood at the edge of a landing platform, his cloak rippling in the high winds of Coruscant's lower levels. Behind him, Bo-Katan Kryze leaned against her starship, arms crossed. The Mandalorian still hadn't decided whether she trusted him, but she was listening, and that was enough for now. You're asking Mandalorians to fight your war, she said, her tone skeptical. Last time we followed a Jedi, it didn't end well for us. Revan smirked. I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm offering a fight worth having. Bo-Katan raised an eyebrow. Against who? Revan turned, his expression hard. The true Sith. Bo-Katan scoffed. You mean your Jedi ghosts? Your Sith have been extinct for centuries, Revan. Revan's eyes darkened. You think Sidious is alone? He stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. You think this galaxy is safe just because the Jedi have been blind for 1,000 years? He shook his head. I've fought the Sith in ways you can't imagine. They never die. They wait. They manipulate. And now they're inside the Republic. Bo-Katan's smirk faded. She might not have trusted Jedi, but she knew the Republic was rotting from within. Say, I believe you, she said. What's your plan? Revan glanced up toward the Coruscant skyline. We need warriors. The Mandalorians are scattered, but they still know how to fight. If we gather them, we can prepare for what's coming." Bo-Katan exhaled. "Mandalorians don't trust Jedi, but they do trust power. If you want them to listen, you'll have to prove you're strong enough to lead." Revan smirked. "That won't be a problem." And in the darkest reaches of Coruscant's underworld, a lone figure stepped out of a silent ship. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his red eyes, and his long coat barely rustled as he moved. Cad Bane had arrived. He adjusted the twin blasters on his hips, his sharp gaze scanning the neon-lit streets. The payout Sidious had promised was more than he had ever been offered before. And the target? A warrior out of time. Bane exhaled through his respirator. "Let's see what makes you so special, Revan." He disappeared into the shadows, hunting the most dangerous prey of his career. Within the Jedi Temple, tensions were rising. Qui-Gon stood before the council once again, but this time his presence was not entirely welcome. "You spoke with Revan again," Mace Windu said. It was not a question. Qui-Gon did not deny it. "Yes, and he's right. The Sith are not gone." Mace's expression hardened. "The council disagrees." Qui-Gon took a step forward. "Then the council is wrong." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Obi-Wan, standing at his master's, sighed, felt the weight of every gaze. "You are treading dangerous ground, Qui-Gon," Ki-Adi-Mundi said. Qui-Gon's voice was firm. "If the Jedi refuse to act, we will fall, just as Revan warned." Silence. Then Yoda spoke, his voice slow and careful. "Watch, we must. Careful, we must be. But heed Revan's path, we cannot." Qui-Gon inhaled deeply. "Then I will find my own path." Windu's expression darkened. "You would defy the Jedi?" Qui-Gon's answer came without hesitation. "I would save them." He turned and walked out of the chamber. Obi-Wan hesitated for only a second before following. For the first time in centuries, the Jedi were splitting. The sound of a single blaster shot rang through the night. Revan dodged at the last second, the plasma bolt scorching past his shoulder. He spun, hand snapping to his lightsaber, violet energy igniting in the darkness. Cad Bane stepped out of the shadows, twirling his blaster. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, analyzing, measuring. "Fast," the Duros said, tipping his hat. "But let's see if you can keep up." Before Revan could respond, Bane moved. Fast. Revan barely deflected the next round of shots, his saber spinning in precise arcs. But Bane wasn't just firing, he was maneuvering. Every shot was a distraction, forcing Revan to react while the bounty hunter closed the distance. Revan smirked. "He's good." Bane suddenly vanished, his jet boots propelling him upward. From above, he unleashed a barrage of fire, forcing Revan to roll aside. The bounty hunter landed with practiced ease, reaching for something on his belt. Revan saw the move, but too late. A shock device hurled from Bane's hand, latching onto Revan's wrist. A surge of energy ripped through him, forcing his muscles to seize. Bane aimed his blaster at Revan's head. "You're good," he admitted, "but I'm better." Revan exhaled sharply. "Doubt it." Then he moved. In a pulse of raw force energy, the shock device exploded, sending arcs of blue lightning in all directions. Bane was blasted backward, skidding across the ground. Before he could recover, Revan was already there. His saber ignited in a blur of motion, slashing downward, forcing Bane to roll aside at the last second. The bounty hunter snarled, "You Griffin Jedi!" Revan's blade stopped an inch from his throat. His smirk was calm. "I told you I'm not a Jedi." Bane scowled. "So what now? You kill me?" Revan tilted his head. "No." Bane frowned. "What?" Revan deactivated his lightsaber. "You work for money. Who's paying you?" Bane hesitated. "Why do you care?" Revan crossed his arms. "Because if they're trying to kill me, they're afraid of me, and that means I'm winning." Bane considered this. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet, brushing dust from his coat. "All right," he said, "but it's going to cost you." Revan smirked. "I just let you live. That should be payment enough." Bane sighed. "Fine, your mystery employer? Some high-ranking politician? Name's not on the contract, but he's powerful." Revan's expression didn't change. "I already know who it is." Bane raised an eyebrow. "You do?" Revan nodded, and Sidious. Silence. Bane exhaled. "Then you're in deep, friend. Real deep." Revan's smirk didn't waver. "That's where I do my best work." High above Coruscant, in the Senate chambers, Darth Sidious watched. He had felt the disturbance, the failed assassination, Revan's survival. The Sith Lord scowled. Revan was not an enemy he had anticipated, but he would adapt. He always did, and when the time came, Revan would fall, one way or another. The distant hum of Coruscant's traffic filled the night air as Revan stood atop an abandoned tower, staring out over the cityscape. His duel with Cad Bane had only confirmed what he already knew. Sidious was afraid of him. The Sith Lord had tried to remove him before he could gather his forces. That meant it was time to move faster. Bo-Katan approached from behind, arms crossed. "So, the bounty hunter still breathing?" Revan smirked. "For now." The Mandalorian chuckled. "Did he tell you who sent him?" Revan's expression darkened. "Sidious." Bo-Katan exhaled sharply. "Sith." The word dripped with contempt. Revan turned to her. "It's time we start building our own forces." Bo-Katan studied him. "Where do we start?" Revan's smirk was sharp. "Mandalore." Bo-Katan's eyes widened. Slightly, but then a slow grin spread across her face. "You really have no fear, do you?" Revan shrugged. "Fear is a luxury I can't afford." Bo-Katan's grin faded. "The clans are fractured. We're warriors, not politicians, and Death Watch still holds power." Revan nodded. "Then we'll take it from them." Bo-Katan inhaled. "This isn't a fight you can win with a lightsaber, alone." Revan's smirk deepened. "Good thing I know how to fight like a Mandalorian." Bo-Katan laughed. "All right, Revan. Let's see if you can survive Mandalore." Back on Coruscant, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi walked through the silent halls of the Jedi Temple. The Council had denounced Revan, claiming he was dangerous, a relic of a forgotten war. But Qui-Gon knew the truth. The Jedi were blind. "You're troubled, Master," Obi-Wan said quietly. Qui-Gon sighed. "We have allowed the Sith to grow in the shadows, and the Council refuses to see it." Obi-Wan hesitated. "What will you do?" Qui-Gon stopped and turned to his apprentice. "The Jedi are divided, Obi-Wan. A choice will come. When it does, you must trust your own judgment." Obi-Wan's brow furrowed. "Master, are you leaving the Order?" Qui-Gon didn't answer immediately. Then he placed a hand on Obi-Wan's shoulder. "If the Jedi refuse to act, then I will act without them." Obi-Wan's heart clenched. He had followed his master for years, but this felt like treason. And yet, deep in his soul, he wondered if Qui-Gon was right. The gauntlet dropped. Out of hyperspace, Mandalore's scorched surface looming ahead. The last time Revan had been here, it had been during the Mandalorian Wars. Now he was returning for something greater. Bo-Katan stood at the viewport, her face unreadable. "If you want the Mandalorians to follow you, you'll have to challenge the strongest leader they have." Revan smirked. "Then tell me, who's in charge now?" Bo-Katan's jaw tightened. "Saxon, Death Watch's enforcer." Revan nodded. "Then he's first." The ship descended toward Sundari, the capital of Mandalore. Warriors gathered as Revan and Bo-Katan stepped out, their presence immediately noticed. "Who are you?" a gruff voice called. Revan pulled back his hood. "I am Revan, and I challenge your leader." A murmur ran through the warriors, and then laughter. Saxon stepped forward, clad in red Mandalorian armor. You? You're no Mandalorian. You think we'd follow a Jedi? Revan smirked. I think you'll follow the strongest warrior? Saxon sneered. Then let's test that theory. The crowd cheered as the challenge was accepted. Revan merely rolled his shoulders. This would be fun. The fight began without warning. Saxon charged. Twin. Vibroblades flashing. Revan sidestepped, effortlessly deflecting the first strike with his gauntlet before catching Saxon's wrist and flipping him onto his back. The Mandalorian snarled, rolling to his feet. He fired his wrist rockets, but Revan dodged with inhuman speed, closing the distance before Saxon could react. A punch to the gut, a knee to the face. Saxon staggered, his helmet cracking from the impact. He ripped it off, blood dripping from his nose. You fight like a Mandalorian, he admitted, spitting blood. Revan smirked. I trained your ancestors. With a roar, Saxon activated his jetpack, launching himself high before diving straight at Revan. His blade slashed downward, but Revan caught it mid-air. The entire arena went silent. Saxon struggled, trying to overpower him, but Revan's grip was unbreakable. And then, crack. With a single fluid motion, Revan broke Saxon's arm and sent him crashing to the ground. Saxon groaned, clutching his shattered limb. Revan stepped forward. Yield! Saxon looked up, his eyes blazing with defiance. He reached for his blaster. Revan's boot slammed down on his hand. The pain forced Saxon to scream. Yield, Revan repeated. Saxon hesitated, then nodded. I yield. Silence fell over the Mandalorians. Then one by one they kneeled. Bo-Katan stepped forward, a slow smile spreading across her face. You just took Mandalore, she murmured. Revan exhaled. Then let's prepare for war. Sidious sat in his dark chambers, watching the events unfold. Revan had just done the impossible. He had united Mandalore. The Sith Lord scowled. This was not how things were meant to go. But he was not without options. Sidious reached out into the darkness, his voice a whisper of malice. The time has come. End him. A shadow moved in the darkness, a presence older than time itself. Darth Plagueis opened his eyes, and the galaxy shuddered. The Mandalorian throne room was dimly lit, the air heavy with tension. Revan stood at the center, his violet lightsaber resting on his belt. Around him, Mandalorian warriors had gathered. Bo-Katan, Saxon, his arm still in a sling, and the leaders of various clans. Mandalore was his now, but the real war was only beginning. Bo-Katan leaned against the war table, scanning the holomap of the galaxy. You made a lot of enemies today, she muttered. The Republic, the Jedi, the Sith. We might have just painted a giant target on our backs. Revan smirked. Good. Let them come. Saxon grunted. They will, and when they do, they won't fight fair. Revan nodded. Neither will we. The Mandalorian clans murmured in approval. They had spent years under Republic scrutiny, treated like relics of a bygone era. But now they had purpose again. Then the alarms blared. Bo-Katan's hand went to her blaster. What now? A Mandalorian scout rushed into the chamber. We have incoming ships, not Republic, not Jedi. Revan's expression darkened. Sith. The doors to the throne room slammed shut, and the temperature in the room dropped. The shadows at the edges of the chamber shifted, twisting unnaturally. A presence older than time itself filled the air, and then he appeared. A tall, skeletal figure in dark robes emerged from the shadows, his sunken yellow eyes locking onto Revan. Bo-Katan instinctively reached for her blaster, but Revan lifted. A hand. Stop. He knew who this was. Darth Plagueis. Revan's jaw tightened. I was wondering when you'd crawl out of the dark. Plagueis smiled, his voice a deep whisper. You should not exist, Revan, and yet, here you are. The Mandalorians watched in uneasy silence. They could feel this creature's power, an ancient weight pressing down on the room. Revan took a step forward, unafraid. "Sidious sent you to kill me, didn't he?" Plagueis chuckled. "Sidious is ambitious, but he does not yet understand true power." Revan narrowed his eyes. "Then why are you here?" Plagueis studied him. "To offer you a choice." Silence. "You do not belong in this time," the Sith Lord continued. "You are an aberration, a relic of an era long dead." He took another step forward. "But you are also powerful, more powerful than the Jedi, more dangerous than Sidious himself." Revan's hand drifted to his lightsaber. "You're wasting your breath." Plagueis smiled. "Am I?" He extended a clawed hand. "You have walked the path of both Jedi and Sith. You, more than anyone, understand that the Force is not bound by their teachings." Revan narrowed his eyes. "And?" Plagueis stepped closer. "Join me." The Mandalorians tensed. Plagueis' voice dropped to a whisper. "You and I, together we could reshape the galaxy, not as Jedi, not as Sith, but as gods." Silence filled the room. Then Revan laughed, a dry, humorless chuckle. Plagueis frowned. Revan smirked. "You, Sith never change, do you?" Plagueis' yellow eyes narrowed. "You mock me?" Revan took another step forward, his violet saber igniting in a hum of power. "I defeated the Sith once before. You think I'd ever stand beside you?" Plagueis exhaled, slowly, a shame. Then he moved. Faster than anything the Mandalorians had ever seen, Plagueis vanished and reappeared inches from Revan. Their sabers clashed, the impact shattering the air around them. Revan twisted, his movements fluid, but Plagueis was relentless. His strikes were not wild like Maul's, not refined like Dooku's. They were perfect, cold, calculated, precise. The Mandalorians opened fire, but Plagueis simply lifted a hand, and the blaster bolts froze in mid-air before reversing and tearing through their own ranks. Bo-Katan barely dodged the deadly onslaught. "This guy is cheating," Revan gritted, his teeth. "That's what Sith do." Plagueis lashed out with the Force, sending Revan crashing through the throne. The ancient warrior groaned, but rolled to his feet instantly. Plagueis smirked. "You are strong, but you are out of your time. Revan, this is not your war." Revan wiped blood from his lip. "It is now." Plagueis' smile faded. "Then you will die with the rest of them." He raised both hands, and the Force itself bent. The entire palace trembled, walls cracking, the floor collapsing under the sheer weight of his power. Revan exhaled sharply, then he reached out and pushed back. For the first time in centuries, Plagueis faltered. The two titanic forces clashed, their power rippling outward like a storm. Plagueis' eyes widened slightly. "Impossible," Revan smirked. "I get that a lot." Then, with a final push of power, he sent Plagueis hurtling through the wall, launching him clear out of the palace. The Mandalorians scrambled to their feet. Bo-Katan ran up. "Is he dead?" Revan shook his head. "Not even close." Outside, a storm was forming. A dark wound in the Force. Plagueis was still alive. Saxon groaned. "Then what the hell do we do?" Revan stared out at the ruined landscape, his mind racing. Plagueis was stronger than he had anticipated. Sidious would not stop coming for him. The Republic was blind. The Jedi were divided. Revan took a deep breath. Then, finally, he knew what he had to do. He turned to Bo-Katan. "We're taking this fight to Coruscant." The Mandalorians froze. Bo-Katan blinked. "You're insane." Revan smirked. "Probably." He turned to the others. "But we can't wait for them to come to us. We hit first, we hit hard, and we end this war before it starts." The Mandalorians exchanged glances. Then Bo-Katan grinned. "I like it." The warriors cheered, their bloodlust rising. Revan turned toward the stars, his expression unreadable. One way or another, this war was about to end. The war drums of Mandalore thundered across the stars. In orbit above the planet, fleets of Mandalorian warships stood ready. Gauntlet fighters, basilisk droids, and stolen Republic vessels had been refitted for battle. Warriors prepared their weapons, armor gleaming under the red glow of hyperspace lanes. Revan stood at the helm of the Mandalore's Wrath, the largest capital ship in the fleet. Beside him, Bo-Katan adjusted her gauntlets, her expression tight with anticipation. "This is madness," she muttered. "Attacking Coruscant head-on." Revan smirked. "It's not madness if it works," Bo-Katan snorted. "And if it doesn't?" "Then we die gloriously," Revan replied. Bo-Katan sighed. "You'd have made a good Mandalorian." Revan turned back to the viewport, his eyes locked onto their target. "I was." With a flick of his wrist, he activated the fleet-wide comms. "Warriors of Mandalore," he said, his voice calm yet filled with power. "We stand on the edge of history. For too long the Jedi have stagnated. The Sith have thrived in the shadows. The Republic has rotted from within." He took a deep breath. "But today, we end it. Today, we burn away the corruption. The Sith think they control the Republic from the darkness." His smirk widened. "Let's remind them what happens when you drag Mandalorians into a fight." A roar of approval erupted across the fleet. Bo-Katan grinned. "Well, you certainly know how to start a war." Revan's eyes darkened. "I'm about to end one." He turned to his pilots. "Take us in." The fleet jumped to hyperspace. Deep within Coruscant, in his hidden sanctum, Darth Sidious watched. The moment he had foreseen was finally here. Revan was coming for him. Sidious's lips curled into a smile. Good. Behind him, Plagueis stood, his skeletal frame hidden beneath dark robes. Though wounded from his last battle with Revan, his power had only grown more focused, more ruthless. Sidious turned to his master. "The Mandalorians are blind with their thirst for battle. Revan leads them straight to their doom." Plagueis nodded. "And the Jedi?" Sidious exhaled. "Still lost. Their council is fractured. Qui-Gon Jinn will not stand with them. Kenobi is torn between loyalty and reason." Plagueis's sunken yellow eyes glowed. "Then the time has come." Sidious smirked. "Indeed, the Jedi will fall." They both turned to the massive window overlooking Coruscant's skyline. Soon it would burn. Hyperspace ruptured open as Mandalorian warships dropped into orbit over Coruscant. Immediately, Republic defense fleets scrambled to intercept, but they were too slow. Gauntlet fighters dove into formation, weaving between Republic cruisers, ripping through their formations with brutal efficiency. Basilisk droids descended like metal demons, clawing through enemy capital ships, ripping apart turrets and engines. From the bridge of the Mandala's Wrath, Revan watched the chaos unfold. His strategy was working. The Republic wasn't ready. Bo-Katan's voice crackled through his comm. "Republic defenses are holding for now, but their forces are stretched thin." Revan nodded. "Then we push before they regroup." He turned to the drop troopers behind him, 100 of the best Mandalorian warriors. "Prepare for ground assault," he commanded. The warriors roared in agreement. Then, without hesitation, Revan leapt into the void. Within the Jedi Temple, the Council stood in stunned silence. "Mandalorians, here, now." Mace Windu clenched his fists. "This is Revan's doing." Yoda's ears twitched. "Certain you are?" Before Windu could answer, the temple trembled. Explosions rocked the outer walls. Fires erupted across the skyline. Qui-Gon Jinn stood near the entrance, watching as chaos descended upon the capital. Obi-Wan swallowed hard. "Master, what do we do?" Qui-Gon exhaled slowly. "We find Revan, and we end this." The Jedi ignited their blades. The battle for Coruscant had truly begun. The dropship doors slammed open, and Revan dove into the streets of Coruscant. Blaster fire erupted all around him as Mandalorian warriors engaged Republic troopers. The once pristine city was now a war zone. Fires raging, buildings collapsing, civilians fleeing in terror. And at the heart of it all, Revan fought. His violet lightsaber carved through Republic droids, his precision unmatched. Every movement was a calculated strike, a symphony of violence. He could feel it. Sidious was near. Then the air froze. A dark shadow descended upon the battlefield. Darth Plagueis landed in front of him, his skeletal form crackling with the dark side. "You do not belong here," Plagueis hissed. "This is not your war." Revan smirked, twirling his saber. "I made it mine." Plagueis lunged. The ground shattered. Beneath their first clash, shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. Mandalorians and Republic soldiers alike staggered, their battle momentarily forgotten as the two titans clashed. Plagueis fought with precision, his strikes cold and merciless. But Revan had fought gods before. He had walked the line between Jedi and Sith. He had mastered both sides of the Force. Their blades clashed over and over until Plagueis snarled and extended his hand. The Force collapsed around Revan. The Mandalorian warriors froze. Their bodies seized mid-motion. Buildings cracked, and Revan fell to his knees, the weight of the dark side crushing him. Plagueis stepped forward, his skeletal fingers reaching out. "Join me, Revan, or be erased." Revan's vision darkened. He felt his strength slipping, and then a blue lightsaber slashed through the darkness. Plagueis staggered back, his concentration breaking. Revan inhaled sharply, his vision clearing just in time to see a figure standing beside him. Qui-Gon Jinn. The Jedi Master lowered his blade, glancing at Revan. "I thought you could use some help." Revan exhaled. "Took you long enough." Qui-Gon smirked. "I like to make an entrance," Plagueis growled, his eyes burning with fury. Revan stood, his energy returning. He ignited his saber once more, standing, shoulder to shoulder with Qui-Gon. The Jedi and the out-of-time warrior faced the greatest Sith Lord in existence, and together they would finish this. The Coruscant skyline burned. Mandalorian warships hovered above the city, their cannons raining destruction upon Republic defenses. Below, the streets had become a battlefield. Mandalorians clashed with Republic troops, Jedi fought against Sith loyalists, and civilians ran for shelter amidst the chaos. And at the heart of it all, Revan and Qui-Gon Jinn faced Darth Plagueis. The Sith Lord stood in the ruins of the Senate District, his skeletal form illuminated by the glow of flickering flames. His sunken yellow eyes burned with malice as he raised both hands, commanding the Force itself. A shockwave of pure darkness exploded outward. Qui-Gon and Revan leapt apart just in time as the very air rippled, cracking durasteel structures and shattering stone. The weight of Plagueis' power was crushing, a black hole in the Force, suffocating and all-consuming. But Revan had fought worse. He clenched his fist, pulling on the light and the dark, merging them into something more. His violet saber ignited, humming with lethal energy. Qui-Gon stood beside him, his blue blade steady. Though the Jedi Master had once doubted Revan, he knew now this man was not a Sith. He was not even a Jedi. He was something beyond both. Plagueis smirked. "You cannot win this war." Revan tilted his head. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." And then they charged. Plagueis moved first, his crimson saber carving through the air like a serpent's fang. Revan parried, twisting aside as Qui-Gon struck from the opposite direction. The Sith Lord was fast, too fast. He dodged Qui-Gon's strike and sent a wave of the Force crashing into Revan. The former Sith Lord flew backward, smashing into a crumbling speeder. Qui-Gon pressed forward, his blade flashing in fluid, elegant arcs. But Plagueis was relentless, his counters brutal. Their sabers clashed again and again, blue against red, Jedi against Sith. Then, with an unnatural twist of his wrist, Plagueis disarmed Qui-Gon. The Jedi Master gasped as his lightsaber flew from his grip. Plagueis seized his throat with the Force, lifting him high into the air. "You Jedi are pathetic," the Sith Lord sneered, "clinging to your outdated codes. This war was lost before it began." Qui-Gon struggled, his vision darkening. The dark side's grip was too strong. Then a violet blade pierced straight through Plagueis' chest. The Sith Lord froze, his glowing yellow eyes going wide. Behind him, Revan stood, his expression grim. His saber had driven through Plagueis' back, straight through his blackened heart. The Sith Lord released Qui-Gon, who collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Revan leaned in, whispering into Plagueis' ear, "You should have stayed in." The shadows. Then, with a final twist of his saber, he ripped the blade free. Plagueis let out a horrible, strangled sound as he collapsed to his knees. His hands trembled, reaching toward the stars, as if trying to grasp one final shred of power. But there was nothing left. The dark side, the Force, the very will of the Sith, all of it abandoned him. Darth Plagueis the Wise was dead. And, for the first time in centuries, the galaxy shifted. High above Coruscant, aboard a hidden command ship, Darth Sidious watched in silence. Plagueis was dead. Revan had won. But Sidious did not scream. He did not rage. He simply smiled. "Good," he whispered. Behind him, Count Dooku stepped forward. "My lord?" Sidious turned, his golden eyes gleaming. "The time has come. Execute Order 66. Dooku's expression darkened. "But the war is not yet over." Sidious raised a hand, silencing him. "It is now. The Jedi and Mandalorians will tear each other apart, and when the dust settles," he smirked, "I shall be Emperor." Dooku hesitated, then slowly he bowed. Sidious turned back to the window. The galaxy was his now. All that remained was Revan. The Republic was falling apart. Jedi Knights and Republic troops had turned against one another. Mandalorians clashed with Republic clones. Chaos reigned. In the heart of it all, Revan stood beside Qui-Gon, surveying the battlefield. "This isn't victory," Qui-Gon muttered. "This is slaughter." Revan clenched his fists. He could feel it, the shift in the Force. Sidious had planned for this. The war hadn't ended. It had changed. Bo-Katan's voice crackled over the comm. "Revan, we're being overrun. Republic forces just received new orders. They're killing Jedi now, too." Revan's expression darkened. It had begun. Sidious had just wiped out both the Jedi and Mandalorians in a single move. Qui-Gon clenched his jaw. "We need to get to the temple. There are still Jedi who don't understand what's happening." Revan exhaled sharply. "We can't save them all." "But we can save some," Qui-Gon countered. Revan hesitated, then nodded. "Then let's move." The Jedi temple burned. Clones stormed the halls, blasters tearing through Jedi, slaughtering them in droves. Revan and Qui-Gon raced through the chaos, cutting down troopers as they searched for survivors. They found younglings, trapped in the ruins. Qui-Gon ushered them to safety, while Revan held the line, his saber carving through wave after wave of enemies. But even he could not stop them all. The Jedi Order was dying. The battle had lasted hours. In the end, only a few Jedi remained. Revan stood beside Qui-Gon, his armor scorched, his body battered. Bo-Katan limped toward them, blood streaking her face. "It's over," she muttered. Qui-Gon sighed, closing his eyes. "The Sith have won." Revan turned toward the smoke-filled horizon. "Not yet," Bo-Katan frowned. "You still have a plan?" Revan exhaled. "Not a plan. A lesson." He turned to Qui-Gon. "The Jedi must change. The Mandalorians must evolve. And as long as Sidious rules, neither will happen." Qui-Gon met his gaze. "What are you saying?" Revan smirked. "I'm saying it's time to break the cycle." Bo-Katan frowned. How? Revan's violet eyes glowed. By becoming something neither Jedi nor Sith can control. Silence, then understanding. Qui-Gon nodded. Then let's begin. The three warriors stood together, watching as the Republic collapsed. They were no longer Jedi, no longer Sith, no longer Mandalorian. They were something new, and in the shadows of the Empire's rise, a new war began.